Hi, everybody. Welcome to this interview for World Cancer Research Day. Today, I'm joined by three of our editorial board and fellows forum members, Dr. Steve Freedland, Dr. Waqas Haque, and Allison Rosen. And we're really excited today to have this conversation for World Cancer Research Day and discuss some of the ongoing research in the field, as well as the importance of participation in clinical trials. So with that, I will turn it over to our speakers today to start the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Kira. I'll get us started. So, hi, everyone. Steve Freedland. I'm a urologist and focus mostly on prostate cancer. But one of the areas that I've been interested in prostate cancer for a long time is early detection. And cancer is obviously a scary thing. And there's a lot of data in a lot of cancers that if we can find it early, we can treat it more effectively. And that needs to be balanced with sometimes we screen and we make people anxious and nervous and don't find any cancer, or we sometimes nowadays we're so good at finding cancer, we find cancers that don't ever need to be treated, and yet we can't always figure out who those are, so we do treat them, and that can lead to some harm. So early detection is not without its downsides, but the plus sides is, at least in many cancers, has been shown that early detection does save lives. Again, albeit with a downside, and it needs to be individualized for each patient. But one of the questions that always comes up is, what's the best way to find cancer, right? I mean, wouldn't it be great if I could have one blood test? I go into the doctor and they just screen for everything. And are we ever going to have that day? And there's a lot of research going on looking at that. And I think the answer is someday we will be there. I don't think we are there yet. There are a lot of cancers that kind of fly under the radar that are not common, but if you collectively add up all the not common cancers, they actually become kind of common. And so it's hard to do good research when the individual cancer you're studying is not common, just from a logistics point of view. For many of the common cancers, we do have screening approaches, low-dose CT scans for high-risk people for lung cancer, PSA for prostate, mammography for breast cancer, colonoscopy for colon. So many of the high-incident cancers, we do have good screening. Some we don't have good screening, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer. There's no standardized approach that works. And so one of the approaches that people have been trying to do is these multi-cancer early detection tests, which is a blood test. I think the most famous would be the GRAIL test that's out there by the company GRAIL, or by Epic Sciences, the GRAIL test. And so this idea that you go in, you get a blood test, and it tells you, you have this exact type of cancer, go see this specialist. And that's where the research is going. I don't think we're there yet. These tests, if you think about it, if you think about the research, it's actually an interesting question. Do you want to generate a lot of false positives, but you're not going to miss a lot of cancers? Or do you want to, the alternative is the patients that you identify as positive are really likely to have cancer, but you're going to miss cancers. So which way do we want to do it? Because you can't be perfect. Pick up only the cancers and no non-cancers. Because sometimes you have inflammatory conditions, you leak DNA, you leak proteins that kind of look like cancer. It's not so easy, clear cut to separate those two. And so many of these tests, and I think appropriately so, lean towards, we don't want to miss cancers. And we're certainly not going to be perfect, but the consequence of that is we're going to find things that aren't cancer. And so I think that's where the field is. There are tests out there, the multi-cancer detection tests, but just because you have a positive test doesn't mean you have cancer. It means something's going on. You need to be evaluated. And it turns out a lot of those times you actually don't have cancer. So that's really, and I think, when we start to think about cancer detection, cancer screening, cancer prevention, it's really who's at risk, right? So you're not going to, for example, do prostate testing in cisgender women, right? They don't have a prostate. So you're going to tailor your cancer screenings And we do lung cancer screening, low dose CT scans for lung cancer in those who have a heavy smoking history. And the definition of heavy smoking is evolving. I'm not going to get into those controversies, but that's evolving. But nonetheless, we don't do it in everyone. And I think that's where, what I see a lot of as the research is those focused on a specific cancer. The ideal is where you have one blood test that to rule them all, so to speak, one ring to rule them all, that you can detect every cancer, but it's tough. And so that's why a lot of the tests being developed are specifically focused on one cancer type, and they're in a specific patient population. And these are big studies, 20, 30, 40, 70,000 or plus people in these studies. Grail has been doing a big study with the National Health Services in England, where a lot of patients were getting the test and then seeing what happens. Because, ultimately, again, the ultimate goal is to lead to better outcomes. And we think finding cancers earlier will do that, but to show you're actually reducing mortality is going to take years on those tests. So the interim analysis said, let's keep going. We're not ready to approve this in the national health system in England, but let's keep going. We're not going to abandon it because we're finding cancers, we're finding them early, but what does that ultimately mean? So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions, and the field is trying to grapple with some of these questions. Again, how do you design that perfect biomarker that's sensitive and specific, picks up all the cancers and only the cancers? It's just not reality. And so where are we willing to make the trade-offs? Where are we as a society, as a health system, as an individual person? Where do you draw the line of a test that's good but not great? And that's, again, where the research is. I wish I had great things that we've solved this problem. We haven't yet, but there's a lot of smart people, a lot of patients investing their time and effort. And I think we are moving the needle forward. So stay tuned. Certainly a lot more to come on that. So once patients are diagnosed with cancer, then obviously we start to think about various treatments, options, survivorship, and different things. So I'm happy to talk about some of that, but I certainly want to pass the baton.
I'm happy to talk about the patient perspective. So I'm Allison Rosen. I'm a 12-year early age onset colorectal cancer survivor, and also happened to work in cancer research at the time of diagnosis and was in research for 12 or so years. So now as a patient advocate, I really talk a lot about my experience. Prevention, early detection is key. So I talk a lot about colonoscopies, a lot about FIT testing, Cologuard, like all the options. And there is now an FDA-approved blood test for colorectal cancer screening. I think I'm excited about MCEDs and when they, improve and when I can go in and younger people specifically, especially because early age onset is on the rise. When there'll be something that's available that isn't necessarily invasive, you will get people more people will agree to be screened, and younger people that maybe want to be screened, that if it's not approved by insurance, they'll pay out of pocket just so they can have the understanding on if potentially they can prevent cancer from happening to themselves. I will say that having worked in research for a long period of time, the minute I was asked if they could use my tumor for a research study where I was treated, I was like 100% take my tumor, take whatever you need. Take, if you need more, I'll give you blood, I'll give you this, because I really believe in research and clinical trials. Like every drug I took, every drug every cancer patient takes was at one point in a clinical trial. So research saves lives, and so I advocate all the time for more funding for research through large institutions, small institutions, whoever will provide money. But I go up to Capitol Hill every year and talk about the fact that research saved my life and so many others. But then clinical trials, like just when I'm talking to patients too, there's this preconceived notion that clinical trials are the last ditch effort. And I really want to help spread myths and make sure that the facts are out there regarding clinical trials and that everyone should participate. And a lot of the stigma that they have, I try to break that stigma every day when I'm talking to people. I'm involved in a lot of research grants, actually involved in using social media to educate people, younger people, older people, all different ages and ethnicities and races about clinical trials and the misconceptions that are out there. Because, where are younger people especially going? They're going to social media. And so we want to make sure, myself and some of the doctors I partnered with on some research studies, we want to make sure that they're getting the information that is facts. They're not, listening to, you just can't just Google something and get, the most reliable information. So ensuring people have access to information regarding clinical trials and the importance of research is so important to me as an advocate. So you have, breaking those myths regarding prevention, early detection, clinical trials, screening, research. Some of the few things that I focus on a regular basis. So I serve as the SWOG AYA Adolescent Young Adult research advocate, and so I get to go and work with researchers every day and help with the whole process of clinical trials from beginning, till the very end. And so I encourage anyone that is doing research to ensure that there's a patient advocate as a part of the process from beginning. When you're thinking of what you want to do, the theory, their criteria to enroll people in clinical trials, all the way to recruiting and then analyzing data, because the people that have lived through it really want to help. And so I've had the honor of serving on a lot of different research grants and a lot of different people and helping to develop clinical trials. But anyone that isn't using a patient advocate, I think World Cancer Research Day is a great opportunity to encourage everyone listening. If you don't have one, a patient advocate, or don't know one, I'm happy to introduce you to one. I don't only know colorectal cancer advocates. I know advocates in all the spaces, all the different cancers, including rare cancers, that are just really excited to be able to help, really want their cancer to mean something. So for me, giving back and being an advocate really gives me a purpose in life. So I went through what I did for a reason, and I just want to help others now. So that's why I do a lot of my advocacy. And I'll pass it on so we can get some more information about World Cancer Research Day and what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Allison, for your comments, and Dr. Freedland, really sort of going from, pre-detection to diagnosis of cancers. I definitely agree in terms of cancer screening. It is, currently we're in a really broken system. I mean, the average patient who gets screened over the lifetime with USPSTF criteria screening is going to have at least one false positive over the course of their lifetime. And over 70% of cancers that are diagnosed in the US don't have an associated standardized screening test that's available to them. So those are some definite reasons why things like MCED are really exciting. But I do want to push back a little bit, right? I think we have to be careful about implementation of these tests. Who are we going to test them on? How often? With what frequency? What does the finding mean? Dr. Freedland, I think one of the other patients, kinds of cancers, that not every kind of cancer needs a treatment, right? Some of them you just observe, some of them you actively surveil. Not all of them need to be treated at that very moment. And even in Grail's Pathfinder study that was published about a year ago now, a lot of patients diagnosed with indolent lymphomas. Well, that's great that we found it, but there's really nothing to do with it. It's not really causing the patient any harm. So just thinking a little bit more about what sensitivity and specificity mean in the clinical setting, I think is really interesting. There's an interesting story I read about MCED. There was one scenario where a patient had a positive test on MCED. So they scoped the patient from above, they scoped the patient from below. They couldn't find the tumor. So actually, after the patient's assistance, they re-scoped the patient through EGD and they found a cancer in the middle. So the idea of what positive really means can be elusive. And I think there's a lot of interesting research about the basic science and a population health perspective on how we can really optimize MCED. And even with some of the latest approvals in colon cancer for screening, the detection of advanced adenomas, where we can kind of take it out early, those are still not as good. So a lot of our best MCED detection rates are in stage 3, stage 4 diagnosis, where sometimes patients might already be symptomatic, or you already have a standardized screening test like colonoscopy, for example. So definitely, I'm excited about MCED. I think it has a lot of potential. I really hope it's successful, but I think we just have to do more research to make sure we see it through in all forms of cancers. The thing I want to comment on, Allison, that you brought up about clinical trials is, we talk about the patient-physician relationship, and it's rightly centered on the patient, right? And we have, brave patients like yourself who volunteer their time and their effort and also their tumors to clinical research. But it's a two-way street, because even though there's no clinical trials without patients, there's no clinical trials without providers. And one of the problems we have in clinical research is that we have a lack of providers who are involved in clinical trials, a very small percentage. And I had some research that was published at ASCO a few years ago. It was a survey on over 1,000 oncologists, mainly medical oncologists, but what we found was that there's really a lack of involvement among PIs in clinical trials. And one of the big reasons is because a lot of them don't get training during the residency or fellowship for being involved in clinical trials. A lot of them don't have an incentive to participate in a clinical trial as a PI. And then a lot of them don't really have exposure after training towards how to do clinical trials. And as we sort of add into the role of AI, there's a lot of excitement around these clinical trial tools that can automate patients and find the right patient for a trial and find the right patient for an institution. But if that institution is 500 miles away, it doesn't really matter. So definitely important for patients to get on board with clinical trials and explain the findings in the right way and make sure that disenfranchised populations have access to trials. But we also have to make sure that clinicians know how to participate in trials, and that'll really improve involvement in the future.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about clinical trials, and it's oh so important, and what we really want to make sure is, we talked about rare diseases, right? And actually, the rare tumors make up the majority of cancers in many places. And many of our clinical trials, we have focused on big academic institutions where you tend to see predominantly white patients, predominantly high socioeconomic status patients. And I think it's so crucial that, the biology of the tumors are going to differ by the host and your environment, your socioeconomic status, your environment. Are you exposed to freeway congestion and exhaust coming out of cars because you can only afford to live in the freeway, right off the freeway, or are you up, in the hills where it's nice, fresher air? All of that. Are you stressed? Are you worried? Are you food insecurity? Race plays into all of that, structural racism, systemic. And so all of that is going to influence what the tumor looks like at the end of the day. And so if we're not getting a diverse group of people into clinical trials, we're not going to know how to treat our real world patients when these drugs, look like they're promising. Are they really promising for everyone? And to your point, the way to do that is we need to expand our pool of who's doing these trials, not just the academic big ivory towers that are very important and can do great work and help think through a lot of problems. But we need to make sure our community centers, our VAs, our county hospitals, that those patients that are seen in that networks, that they have access to the clinical trials. And then at the end of the day, the results will apply to those patients as well. So there's a lot of discussion going on of how do we not bring those patients to the academic center, but bring the trials, the world of this big academic ivory tower into the real world and in those environments. There's no easy answer, but it requires a lot of resources. But I've been very impressed. I met with a lot of pharmaceutical companies that I know often get a bad rap, but they're aware of this and are trying very much to overcome this and work with this and build the infrastructure. And the challenge is when you come in, if you put on your hat at the pharmaceutical company, you say, we got a great study. I'd love to open it at the county hospital in fill in the blank county. But if they've never run a clinical trial, they don't have a coordinator. They don't know how to work with IRB. So you got to support the infrastructure first. You got to hire the coordinators, the regulatory people who know how to do FDA regulated studies. And then when that infrastructure is in place, then you can add this study and this. But you can't go from 0 to 1 study. So it takes time. It's a process. But I think there's a lot of interest and commitment, including the pharmaceutical companies, to help solve this and make sure our trials are more equitable.
I love that, not love that you're saying that, but I agree with that, what you're saying fully. And I'm involved as an advocate also in sort of talking about a little bit about decentralization of trials, but making sure that, again, the trial comes to the patient. I live in a large city. I have an MCED designated cancer center right next to me, but the majority of people that I know that are going through cancer right now are in community settings, rural areas. They are treated at, an FQHC, a safety net healthcare system. So having, and I agree about the infrastructure, having the mobile unit and everyone that's a part of a mobile unit going to their house or going to the community center or going to the community clinic and making sure that they educate everyone at the clinic first and provide the support they need to implement a trial and then are there the whole way. You can't just drop it off and say, okay, here it is. This is what we need. So that's something that myself and a bunch of other advocates that represent different populations, different ages, different race, and different ethnicities are all giving our feedback in how to develop something like that and how to make sure that, where's the best place for a mobile unit? Do you want it in front of somebody's house? Probably not. I don't think people want people to know that they are, not everyone wants everyone to know that they're going through cancer treatment right now. And not everyone wants someone in their own home. So I think there's a lot happening with some pharma companies, with some, some larger groups to sort of rethink clinical trials and ensuring that access to all is available. And again, you're going to where the patient is, that you're not making the patient travel 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, go on a plane. People can't afford that. People can't leave their job. People can't leave their home. People can't leave their children. There's so many different factors in enrolling patient and clinical trials. So ensuring that people can, access them is so important. I have a short story. I have a friend who, unfortunately, she's passed away. She was a colorectal cancer patient. She raised money to buy a RV. That was the best way for her to stay with her family and still travel to she was in a small town, to a larger town to participate in a clinical trial. It extended her life by, I don't remember exactly how many years, but she homeschooled her kids. Her husband had a virtual job, so they could all travel together in this mobile, this RV to the trial and still be together. I mean, that's rare, but she thought outside the box so that how could she, live, have quality of life, be with her family and still get the best care possible. And, instead of like traveling and all the costs of flying and this and that and being away, and because mental health is so important as a patient. So she was thinking about her physical health, but also her mental health and her family's mental health. And so she extended her life through participation in clinical trials, but it was quality of life at the same time. And I think that's so important.
No, and I think that is crucial, that we need to balance the quality and quantity of life and things. And it's interesting. I always think about the data, for patients with cancer, often patients don't want it, but we certainly understand the benefits of chemotherapy, right? And life prolonging in the right settings and stuff. And there's actually data that being married gives you the same survival advantage as getting chemotherapy. Having that social support network, someone to take you to the doctors, to be there, to support your mental health is so important. And cancer doesn't just affect the patient. I mean, it affects the whole family, affects everyone around them. And so we need to, again, do better jobs at supporting our patients. That's not simply quantity of life, This was a great discussion. I really enjoyed talking to you guys. And I think the bottom line is, we're doing a lot better at finding cancers early. I think we're understanding better who needs aggressive therapy, who doesn't, how to treat, how to support people. But as you heard, we still have a long way to go. We're not there yet. The fight is still going on. And so on this World Cancer Research Day, I thank you for joining us and hearing us kind of discuss our thoughts on where the field is and where it's going. Thank you.